The Decade of Action 2030 calls for accelerating sustainable solutions to the world's biggest challenges. However, we continue to face the prolonged impact of COVID-19 that has impacted the pace of this trajectory. As engines of innovation and growth and hubs of international trade, sustainable and inclusive growth of cities has become a requisite for global sustainability. This panel on maximum cities, urban habitats, growth, and sustainability will deliberate upon rethinking local governance and leadership while realigning regional resources in urban planning and design towards innovative solutions for achieving global sustainable goals. Welcome, everybody. I'm ANUSHA, Senior Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. We will begin with briefly introducing the panelists and with their opening remarks, say about 4 minutes each. We'll follow that up with a round of, again, one more brief round of interventions. And we will follow that up at the end with Q&A from the audience. I request those asking questions to introduce themselves at the end and keep their comments brief and questions concise. I'll just quickly introduce the panelists. We have with us here today, as Jabal mentioned, NICOLAS, Mr. Balasubramaniam, Lucas, Harshita, and CHANDRA BHUSHAN. So Harshita, I'll begin with you. Let us have your opening remarks.
Okay. A very good morning. Thank you for having me here. I'd like to say that I was all of us know that we are facing a climate emergency, but I am particularly looking at sea level rise in our, in the global coastal cities. And I'm particularly interested in looking at coastal resilience planning, especially Mumbai, because Mumbai in the, in the IPCC report was put at highest risk. So if we could, actually have a sea level rise coastal resiliency plan for Mumbai, we can actually use that as a pilot for global cities, coastal cities across the world. It was basically what we want to do are 3 levels that we are looking at in terms of climate adaptation, which is, one is looking at the public infrastructure policy and upgrades. The other is, Mumbai tends to have a lot of heritage structures. So in terms of the design guidelines for the heritage buildings and the private development standards, which is the land use code that is actually there in the development plan. I think these are the 3 key areas that need to be looked at when we're looking at climate adaptation. And I'd like to say that the role of government in this is very, very essential. In fact, it's quintessential because that body can actually make sure that all of the stakeholders, there's participation from all of the stakeholders, from multiple agencies. I'd take Mumbai as an example. We have multiple agencies like the MMRDA, planning agencies as well, MMRDA, BMC, BPT. That makes it a little, they're all doing their research and studies in the area of climate action. And there is a wealth of information available from, from all that research. There's a lot of data there. But what happens is that because they are doing it individually, we don't end up having that on one platform. So a suggestion would be to have like a city-based committee, which has various stakeholders in the committee appointed by the government, and having also multidisciplinary team for the technical component, wherein you have urban planners, where you have engineering component, you have people for land subsidence, geological studies. What this will do is when we have a comprehensive team working at it, it'll bring all of these disparate data sets together on one platform and then study it in a more detailed, and come up with one comprehensive implementation strategy. And in this, the local governance involvement is very essential because I feel we at our level, because I'm a local representative, we can push our, various governments, they function under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji. We are actually very happy that we have the G20 presidency and we're, very action oriented. We can use this platform to push our, areas as well and get more action-oriented on ground, like impact-driven work with the implementation strategies suggested by the experts. For example, for our area, am I to have time? Yes. For our area, we are looking at a study, actually an international study with experts from the US, especially University of Notre Dame. They're heading the sea level rise study. And they have on their consortium global experts from NASA, Sea Level Rise Climate Change Head, as well as MIT, University of Colorado. So what that does is, they also have Xylem who have water, I mean, they have private sector people also participating in the study. They will bring their research and expertise to Mumbai. And it's really nice that we are doing this global exchange of information, best practices, getting their research and data. And they'll study the Mumbai coastline because it's at high risk, especially the southern tip where I represent. So it'll bring a lot of knowledge and expertise based on that. And we'll do local level capacity building when the action, when the time for implementation of the strategies will come. So that's pretty much what we're doing right now.
Thank you, Harshita. I think one of the questions I had for you was also around the project on coastal cities and mitigation around those risks. And you've covered the project that you were working upon. And while I was talking to her outside, she also passionately mentioned about the need for reimagining capacity building of urban local bodies to empower them. Would you want to highlight something around that? Because that is critical to all initiatives that is taken at the local governance level.
Definitely, I think we need to make sure that we're doing that in our areas right now at a very, very micro level, but I think on a macro level, at the municipal bodies, I think having these experts like urban planners be involved in actually city, the whole city planning would be very good, because when we are actually implementing smaller projects, which might have an impact on our coastline, we don't have the expert and technical experts guiding the actual contractors on ground. And I think that kind of expertise will be very, quintessential. In terms of having the local body, municipal body doing these, what you're talking about, having the urban planners come in, it is very important, but also to the extent that when we are doing implementation, there should be a hyper-local, I would say, ward-wise implementation also needs some guidance as well. So that's probably my bit.
Thanks. Thank you, Harshita. Mr. Balasubramanian, I'll move to you now for your opening remarks.
Thank you. I think we talk of urban sustainability, most of us just relate to it as an infrastructure thing or a livelihood economy thing. What we don't really understand is there's a human element to it. And unless you understand people moving into urban areas, sustainability is going to just be another fashion statement, especially urban sustainability. And when I talk of people, my context is having worked both in rural and urban areas and seeing a distinct difference between the way we look at each of them. Unfortunately, our planners and our designers have a homogeneous solution for urban sustainability as they think about rural sustainability too. If I am a land loser in a rural area, coming into a city and getting urbanized, or my land has got acquired and therefore I'm forced to become urbanized, I have a different mindset. I see land as a resource which gives me not just economic gain, but gives me social prestige, it gives me emotional esteem, it gives me a lot more complex things which go with human psyche. And when I lose all that, I don't love the city anymore. And urban areas fundamentally are driven by stakeholding. Rural areas are driven by stakeholding, where I feel part of a community which wants to generate a participatory process, which also includes the economy. Whereas urban areas, whatever we talk, are driven by shareholding and just the individualistic attainments. It is not community by definition. And then we have a constitutional amendment which talks about ward sabhas, which talks about urban local governance from a perspective where automatically it assumes that people participate. Now, I can tell you, when you have a Gram Sabha in a village, the kind of participation you can elicit is very different from a Ward Sabha, where I hardly seen people, I can talk about the city of Bangalore, hardly seen people come in and participate in a budget discussion of their ward. It is left to the councillors, etc. We talk of a circular economy, but the reality of governance in urban areas is a councillor economy. The local councillors determine how things happen, whether they're good or bad or they're corrupt, it all drives the local economy. That's the way it is. That's the reality of the day. Now, you cannot not think about all this when you talk of urban sustainability. Narrowing it down to just a simplistic, competence-driven theoretical model is not going to find solutions. You got to get back the anthropological view into it. So to me, urban planning, at least most urban planners in this country now, working with urban local bodies for capacity building from the national government, we realize that urban local planners just means regulators and approving files, approving projects. They don't do any planning as such. They don't even do any thinking. So if we do not include political economists, sociologists, anthropologists, along with the urban local planners and civil engineers into the conversation, I don't think we're going to really have any sustainability. If you don't understand human psyche and appreciate that developing industrial areas just as industry is not going to happen. It has to be looking at them as people who are going to populate those industrial areas to drive the industrial thinking. So I think it's a complex process. We can't, in our mindset, be thinking shareholding and personal growth, whereas in our articulation and in our talk of stakeholding and collectivization. I don't think those two go together. Unless you can deconstruct this carefully and plan sustainability around these narratives, I think we can keep talking about it till the cows come home, but neither is urban development going to be complete, nor is sustainability going to happen.
Right. I have a quick follow-up question on that. So would you think social impact assessment or participatory planning approaches could significantly shorten the period for, development of also, not just that, but also avoid unwarranted expenditure, therefore, when you have to go back to social impact assessment?
I would say social impact assessment, the way it's done to tick a box and saying that, okay, this project about so many thousand crores, just get a few community people to sit together, and then the local district magistrate or somebody chairs it and approves it. That is not social impact assessment. If you really want social impact assessment, you've got to design mechanisms in which communities engage, participate, and articulate their views right from the planning process. You don't stop there. An assessment is not about what could predictively happen if this land is taken away, but you get communities to feel empowered enough. First, you enlighten them with information, then you constructively engage with them, and third, you empower them to participate at all levels of the process: planning, execution, oversight and implementation, and redressal. Most of the time, communities are not taken seriously enough for everything else. So I think we need to it's a process which needs civil society participation. You cannot discount the power of civil society at the grassroots, working with the communities and people. I think the governments are going through enormous change now. They're recognizing the power potential of community action, and they're talking. This has to mature further. This has to get articulated more stronger systems that we put in place. And that way, I think then it will serve its purpose. Otherwise, if it's in the current construct, it will serve a very limited legalistic purpose. But a real societal purpose, a sustainable purpose can happen only when you follow it's all or none.
Right.
You can't have the cake and eat it too. The cake is community engagement, community action. Then you have to respond to them with the respect that the communities deserve.
Okay, thank you. Lucas, we'll move to you for your opening remarks.
Yes, maybe I can simply aggregate something to the points that have already been touched. Because as we are here sitting together also in an international group, I would like to point out the role of international city-to-city partnerships. And that touches, of course, many points. There are fora of international advocacy for cities such as C40, ICLAI, that are already involved also in negotiation processes on the COPs or at UN level, that advocate for what cities are facing, but also city-to-city partnerships within a country and internationally. And of course, those partnerships, my organization, we are also engaged in establishing an international network of policymakers, urban planners, and scientists to see how to develop in a sustainable way cities for the future. It's a small network of our partners, but still it's one of example. And what you see there is that, of course, it's always the question about the context. Not every city is comparable with one another, but those groups and fora can ease the way to find a good match from another country, from another region, in order to learn from each other. And there are some issues I would like to point out that are very, very common when we talk to our partners at the municipal level. So one is the question about, do the competences of the local government match the budget autonomy they have? So in many cases, a city has a lot of competences in policy making, but not necessarily the budget to implement it. So therefore, it always have to have a dialogue with the federal government or with the state governments, and also on the international level. So this multi-level governance is a very critical issue there. Another point, and maybe just added to what you said, the urban-rural connectivity. You touched on the social dimension on it. I would also like to point out that if we are talking about city development, also in a sustainable way, we are always also talking about land use in rural areas. Even if it comes to decarbonize cities in order to electrify or use of green hydrogen, that means necessity of power generation, where the city limits or the city area is very limited. So it always means also land use in in rural areas, and therefore this horizontal dialogue between urban centers and rural areas is also very important. And the third point I would like to point out is localizing the SDGs. Also in the panel before, we already heard about it. There's now a recent OECD study that gives very precise recommendations on how to monitor and evaluate these and how to localize SDGs on the municipal level, with a big questionnaire they put in with SDG.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe I end
Sure.
here.
No, thanks. I had a quick question again on that as well. So India and Germany, of course, have a long-standing partnership in terms of urban development, but do you see the next level of enhancement for engaging better, for exchange of practices between, going beyond sister cities and looking at how better we can respond to, for example, when cities were the first responders to the pandemic? Do you see, in particular, anything we can do better there?
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic was a very harsh learning, I think, for everything, but it pointed out the importance of local governance. Yeah, that's another point. Of course, when it comes to urban health, when it comes to green public spaces, those are 2 points, for example, that were seen during the pandemic of utmost importance, but which also have a connection to climate change adaptation and mitigation measures. And so I think that the pandemic in pointing, for example, urban health, public spaces, sensitized the policymakers and also the public on it, and gives now the opportunity to also there focus on that. And I know that in international city-to-city fora like ICLAI, like C40, those topics are also already discussed.
Thanks. Nicolas, we move to you.
And honestly, I was comfortably listening to the previous keynotes addresses and opening sessions, and I was thinking, oh, we are getting late. How much time we will have to join the small meeting room where we would be holding our urban conversation? And the time is running, it should be now. And then it was in the plenary session, right? And I must say, for people who are sort of get used to this urban conversation, holding the conversation about how important cities are in urban governance and climate finance, etc., we are also getting used to be sort of in this back room or somewhere else than the plenary, that where the big issues, right, will be discussed. And in fact, we have seen in the last 20 years how much the issue of cities and urbanization has very slowly gained a bit of importance on all sorts of agendas. But if you just take the G20, for example, right? Here we are in the context of the G20 India, and in the context of the T20, we are holding this maximum cities session in a plenary format. This is a bit unusual, I must say. Also, the topic of urbanization, if you just look back in 2019 at the report of the Global Sustainable Development Report, that is the first triennial assessment of the SDGs, urbanization was quoted as one of the 4 sort of mega trends, along with global warming, waste, and a couple of other issues. But then came COVID, and this was a bit... this disappeared a bit from the radar. So this urban question has been blinking on the agenda of the G20. But if you look at where the T20 was originated as one important group, one important civil society engagement group, that is the Seoul Development Consensus in 2010. There was something about infrastructure a little bit. There was something about social development. There was practically nothing about cities or urban development. And if you look carefully in the documents that were produced since then, you would see from sometimes, oh, there would be a good example, of electric buses in that city or pedestrian schemes in that city. And it is always a kind of a list of nice design or nice fancy examples, nothing systemic, right? And I was wondering in the past years, how can we build with the T20? There is an engagement group about cities in the G20, which has always been a bit so-and-so. I'm supporting it, which has always been so-and-so. How long will it take till we, or let's say the experts jointly speaking, the public and private spheres, manage to convince global leaders, because this is the agreed term, that they need to pay more attention to cities? The problem is, it could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. Because if, when we are talking about cities, it's just about like projecting in the physical realm, a series of representations about nice, lush greenery, fancy buildings, electric cars all over the place, then just look outside and how different it is from any kind of social reality, right? If it's just about investments, and God knows this is important, this is not sufficient. And yesterday something was saying in this room, I'm looking at the back of the room to all these younger generations who are knocking at the door. And I think what we have seen in the last, and I will finish with that, I don't want to be too long, in the last couple of years is a growing appetite from younger generations to grasp these urban questions and understand what it is about, etc. I must say here with the G20 India, this was here a little bit last year with in Indonesia, in Italy. We might be at a turning point, but nothing is very clear exactly about what it will be, including this urbanization question as part of the core agenda of the G20. In the G7, there has been the creation last year of a group of cities, Urban 7. In the G20, this is still a bit scattered around, and since it was Sherpa Amitabh Kant inviting the T20 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points to be shared, I think please let us include in those list of 10 points one very crisp point about cities and urban development in an unusual way. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. So Nicola, cities, in order to achieve SDGs, cities are now talking about circular economies. How often do you think these urban circular systems account for the role of social actors in this entire system to make it more efficient and resilient and, as we say, smart cities?
Thank you very much. In 30 seconds, answering to that. In the last 18 months, we have been conducting with a wide range of stakeholders, precisely not just a study, but an exploration of what it means, circular economy, in the conditions of today's urbanization, including second-tier, third-tier cities. First conclusion is we have a big problem that has not been addressed properly, is the fact that focusing on cities, and especially global cities, we have completely abandoned, collectively, the rural-urban interface. And that's a terrible problem, because this has very negative consequences on, on livelihoods, on food and agriculture production, but also in the livelihoods in rural environments, but in the livelihoods in cities. So restoring an urban-rural continuum is a very important priority. The other point is that it is quite rare, maybe at the exception of some mayors of port cities or cities which have, like Houston or Rotterdam, etc. Usually, the management of global supply and value chains and the management of a city is something completely different, and with complete levels of ignorance, respectively, right? So we are talking about implementing circular economy here and that, at a super local level, and just look outside and how many ships and containers, etc., would have gone in and out in that given period of time. So I think here there is also a huge margin of progress that we need to achieve collectively.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I think cities should matter to India more than any other country, because we are going to add an United States in our cities in next 20 years, at least. We'll have 350 million new urban inhabitants, maybe by 2040, 2045. So it matters to India and it matters to G20. But I'm going to talk a little bit about a very specific issue at the intersection of urbanization and climate change, which is heat waves. Now, it is in the news. Right now, Southeast Asia is going through an intense heat wave. But if you look at the impact of climate change, the one impact which will have the largest temporal and spatial impact is going to be heat waves. It can last for 6 months if our temperature is going to increase beyond 2 degrees. Or it will cover 90% of the global population. In fact, we now have heat waves in polar regions. It's not only about tropics now. Subtropic and temperate regions are experiencing heat wave. The problem of heat wave with cities is that we now have a perfect feedback loop between heat wave and urban heat island. And there is no perfect loop in climate science than heat wave and urban heat island loop. And in between that loop is our cooling technology, which is the part of the problem. The current vapor compression technology that we are using has reached its scope of efficiency, highly energy inefficient, uses refrigerant, which is a super greenhouse gas. And the other part of the problem is uniformity in building design. Today, you don't see any difference in a building in London and Delhi. They both have a very different climatic condition. In fact, the uniformity in civil engineering curriculum across the world is mind-boggling. I'm a civil engineer and a planner, so probably the only civil engineer and planner in this panel. But the way we are teaching our students how to construct building is no different in the United States than in India. A temperate part and a tropical part. There has to be some difference. Our ancestors learned to live in harsh climate based on different realities. The last point I would like to make is why G20 needs to come together. And I think one of the most urgent reasons why G20 needs to come together is the emergence of a very dangerous industry on heat waves, and that is geoengineering. Everyone today is talking about geoengineering to save us from heat wave. whether it is stratospheric ozone, sulfur injection. And this industry is growing so rapidly that if G20 doesn't come, set up rules and regulations for geoengineering, we are in big trouble. So I think there is need for us to look at cooling technology, building design, but most importantly, the new climate solution, which I call it as fake solution, which is going to come up. And if we don't act now, we will be in trouble.
Just a specific question on that, because you mentioned cooling technologies. Are there any specific suggestions you have in terms of the bottlenecks that you face while looking at decarbonizing measures for green buildings or some other such technologies?
So we know the answer. In fact, adapting to heat wave is something that we know. In fact, if there are solutions to deal with climatic impact heat wave, we know a lot. Just for your information, one is to have a heat code. There's good news for India. 2 weeks back, Indian Meteorological Department came out with a new heat code, which is a combination of heat and humidity. So far, we were declaring heat wave based on only temperature. But now we are in Mumbai. A month back, I think 16, 18 people died in KESARKAR, not because of temperature. Temperature was only about 36 degrees. The humidity was 60%. So your wet bulb temperature was 30 degrees, which killed people. So one, have a heat code, and I think Indian experience of heat code can be used in different parts of the world. Think about not-in-kind technology. Refrigerant-based technology is a technology of 20th century. That technology is not going to be applicable in 21st century. And same thing about building design. I do not understand, we first construct similar building across the world, then put a machine to cool it or heat it. That's what we do. So there is a lot of commonsensical thing that we can do in our cities. That's what we need to do.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We have time for probably 1 or 2 quick questions from the audience. Please briefly introduce yourselves and keep your questions short.
Good afternoon to everybody. I'm Seiko. We are a private equity firm from New York. The panel about sustainable development, the previous panel, and this panel also, mentions about a lot of concerns. I believe action is where, implementation will lie. We can bring a lot of private credit. We are, currently investing billions of dollars across the world for impact investing. So where precisely at the municipal level or at the, councillor level, some action plan or implementation where we can come as a credit partner is something we would like to understand. If that is developed, we would like to know.
Thank you for your question. It's actually something which we all, when you want to implement strategies or whatever solutions, the main hindrance to that is climate finance funding part. So I'm very happy that you're doing that. And if you're interested, we could actually connect you to the leadership in Maharashtra, at least for the MMR region, Metropolitan Region Climate Action Plan. They are planning to roll out the RFP very soon. And I think this is the way forward, having a public-private partnership. I think that is a very good model to go ahead with. And funding should not be a hindrance because we need to make sure we are acting fast. So thank you, and we can connect later on it. Yeah.
I think it's an important thing. I chair the SEBI's Committee on Social Stock Exchange. India has just launched the Social Stock Exchange, and for BSE and NSE are housing it. And we are looking for impact investors. We're designing instruments right now. So conversation at this level to make sure that municipalities and urban bodies could also play the sort of on the demand side of the equation. And if we can connect supply side of the partners, so we can have an offline conversation after this, and I'll be happy to see how we can use you for our social stock exchange efforts.
Hello. My name is Ansh. I'm a law student. Living in Mumbai, the property prices, like housing prices, are like skyrocketing. So how can we move towards sustainable, affordable housing? Seeing that majority of the rural masses are going to move to urban centers. How can we move towards a more affordable housing that is sustainable in the long run and that can cater to the needs of all sectors of society?
I will try to give an answer in less than a minute to this point. Is the at this moment in the G20 India, the infrastructure working group has positioned the issue of cities at the centerpiece. We need to go further. We need to find a way to investigate, to align the findings of the T20, that group, that ministerial group, the Urban 20 and others, for one specific reason, is typically housing prices depend on a series of macroeconomic factors that were well explained in the roundtable before this morning, linked with inflation and linked with other aspects of pandemic recovery, which have none to do with city planning or even to the provision of housing in a given place. And the absence of regulation, the absence of macroeconomic regulation of that particular point and of the real estate industry, especially at the G20 level, makes it like completely open bar for a number of stakeholders and impossible for citizens and even for city and municipal authorities to cope with that. The only way to find solutions is to upscale the game, but this has not been done yet. And I hope that this year with the G20 India, we might lay the foundations for things to be continued with our colleagues from Brazil and South Africa in the next years.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. With that, we will end this panel. Yeah.